Welcome everyone to the latest in a series of development and support webinars delivered by the NIHR Academy. My name is Taylor and I work in the NIHR Academy as a Leadership Development and Support Manager. This webinar, Overcome Imposter Phenomenon, is delivered in conjunction between the NIHR Academy and Capfinity, our leadership programme partners, and they will be facilitated today by Karen Sargent. Karen believes work can be a huge source of joy and satisfaction when done right, and is deeply passionate about helping leaders discover what this means to them. The mission behind her work is to help people move away from outdated working practices and into ways of working that work for them. So I'll now hand over to Karen.
Thank you so much, Taylor, and hello everyone. I am so delighted to be here with you to talk about the idea of imposter phenomenon. So I am one of the psychologists at Capfinity, and for the past 20 years or so, a big part of my role has either been running workshops, generally with leaders, or coaching leaders on one-to-one. And this subject is particularly close to my heart because I definitely have experienced imposter phenomenon on countless occasions. You know, when you have to stand up in front of a group of people, most of the time they're more senior than you, more experienced than you. It's really, really easy to kind of worry whether you are expert enough to be talking there. I know I certainly felt it whenever I've been working, especially with an IHR. But I also know that there are so many tools that we can use to support us so that imposter phenomenon does not stop us. So I've loved seeing some of the definitions that you've sent via chat around what do we think imposter phenomenon is. And there's a real theme, right, around every single one of those conversations, which are around the fact that sometimes we don't believe that our achievements are due to our ability. So imposter phenomenon happens when we believe that we've achieved things due to luck rather than because of the skills or the abilities that we bring. And we're going to start by exploring some of the things we might tell ourselves when we're experiencing imposter phenomenon. So I'm going to show you a few quotes, and I'd love to see your reaction if you actually resonate with this. So share with me a thumbs up if any of these resonate with you. So the first one is I sometimes question whether I've truly earned the success I've had or I was just lucky. Or B, I still don't feel like the expert and I'm not sure that I will ever change. Or C, I'm afraid that people will find out I'm not as capable as they think I am. So give me a reaction, a thumbs up if any of these resonate. I'll just give us a moment to find our reaction buttons or our chat if you want to just say yes. Yes, I'm seeing thumbs up coming up. Yeah, absolutely. Lots of yeses. And that's exactly it, right? And I hope that by the very fact that you are seeing so many yeses pop up on chat, it kind of tells us that this isn't something that few of us experience. Actually, it turns out that many of us experience imposter phenomenon. So let's start with the history. Where did this come from and how did we come to know about it? So it comes from a couple of psychologists who in the 70s were observing high achieving women. And they found that there was this real common theme emerging is that actually these women felt like frauds and they were scared that they were not expert enough in what it was that they were doing. And that's when the psychologists coined the term imposter syndrome. Now, over the years, what we've realized is that this is a very common thing, which is why we try to use the language that it's a phenomenon rather than a syndrome. It's not a disorder. Most of us will experience it. It's a universal experience. So I still remember, especially I started working with an IHR about 6 years ago, running leadership programs. And I very much felt this idea of I am coaching and working with these leaders who are so accomplished in their careers, who have had such impact on healthcare and social care. Who am I, right, to to teach them anything? But what truly blew my mind is that in many of my one-to-one conversations, we ended up talking about the fact that they felt like imposters, that they felt that they weren't expert enough. So it's definitely something that we see in many people. And in fact, when you look at the research, this is exactly the same thing. So in a meta-analysis that was published this year in BMC Psychology, so it was a meta-analysis of 30 studies, they discovered that 62% of healthcare professionals suffered from the imposter phenomenon at some point. Similarly, Business Info magazine has found that 78% of leaders also experience it. So we can see that this is a very common thing to experience. And one of the stories that really stayed with me was when I read about this author, Neil Gaiman, who was invited to join a group of thinkers. Neil Gaiman is an author. And as he was there, kind of networking, getting to know the other people in the room, he started chatting to another guy whose name was also Neil. And this other guy told him, my goodness, I'm looking at these people around me and I think, what the heck am I doing here? They've done so much. And yet, I only just went there where they told me to. Turns out that this other Neil was none other than Neil Armstrong. So I guess if Neil Armstrong can feel like an imposter, then maybe it's no surprise that we do too. So we've talked about what imposter phenomenon is. It's this idea of assigning our abilities to luck, or our success to luck rather than ability. And in fact, when we look at how does it manifest, generally there's two things that are particularly common with imposter phenomenon. One is this inability to internalize success. So we always blame it on someone else or the right time or being lucky. But then there's something else. And the something else is around maladaptive perfectionism. So it's when perfectionism starts to hold us back. So when it makes us freeze. And so it's worth thinking about, when is it that imposter phenomenon can stop me, right? Can paralyze me. Now, the question is this, can it actually be a good thing? And again, I'll just see some reactions in chat. Thumbs up or no. Sometimes I'm hearing sometimes, I'm seeing a thumbs up, I'm seeing not sure. Yeah, so there's a bit of a division here. Maybe some are like, yes, definitely. So loads of there's a spectrum of responses here. So there's some research by Basima Tufik, and what she discovered was when she was looking at the relationship between imposterism at work and job performance. And actually, what she found was that when people reported a high level of imposter kind of phenomenon or experiencing imposterism, they were also tended to be the people that were rated highly for their interpersonal skills. So experiencing imposterism sometimes can help us be a little bit more humble. It can help us actually want to engage more. They were rated as better listeners. So there is a benefit there. And when I think about how it affects me, it kind of makes me very conscientious. I know I always show up well prepared. I work hard. I'm constantly wanting to learn. I'm constantly wanting to grow. I'm reading. And I guess this is the beauty of imposter syndrome, when it's not at an extreme where it paralyzes us. So it can be a good thing if we know how to manage it. So the fact that we experience imposterism actually is no bad thing. The challenge comes when we believe it and we let it kind of stop us from going for things that we want to achieve. And so, and someone else is saying, yes, but at what cost? And I think this is something that we need to be mindful of. Is it pushing us to a place where we maybe are close to burnout, right? Are we being paralyzed? And those are the things that actually we need to focus on, not the fact that we experience it, because many of us will. And for me, knowing this makes sure that the story I tell myself when I experience it isn't one, if I'm experiencing this, then surely it must be true. Surely I'm not expert enough. And instead, the story I tell myself is, okay, I'm experiencing it. Let me see what I can do about it so it doesn't stop me. And that's a very different conversation for us to have with each other. So, we're going to share with you three key things that can help us manage our own inner imposter. So, the acronym is OWN. O is for outlining your values. So, really taking the time to understanding what is it that you bring to the table? What are the strengths that are really, really useful in your career success? Secondly, there's W, welcome feedback. So we're going to look at how feedback can really help us manage our imposter. And then finally, the third thing we're going to look at is how do we nurture connections? So let's start with the first one, outlining your value. And actually, I want us to take a moment to think about in the past maybe couple of months, a time when we might have received a compliment and a time when we might have received some criticism, or maybe we made a mistake where someone gave us some improvement feedback. And when you've done both, just type in yes. You won't be able to see the chat, so don't worry if you can't see it, but it just gives me an indication of when I can move on. Okay, I'm hearing yes. Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of yeses come up. All right, brilliant. Now, my question is this: which one was easier to recall? Was it the compliment or the criticism? Yes, and there we go. There is an overwhelming sea of criticism coming up in the chat. And again, don't worry if you can't see it; it's absolutely fine, or you can't change the settings. I will read out the important things. So yes, this is the thing that we need to be mindful of: is that as humans, it is much easier for us to remember criticism than remembering a compliment, simply because of something called negativity bias. And negativity bias is a kind of survival strategy from our brain. It looks at what's wrong before it looks at what's right. And if you think about it, this was really important back in caveman times. When we lived in caves, when we were about to leave the cave, chances are that we needed to look at, is there something that's going to try and eat me as I leave the safety of my abode? And so in that scenario, a negativity bias was really, really important. But in today's day and age, we still assign more value to things that are wrong rather than things that are right. And as a result, we might end up with a skewed perspective of what the reality is. So it's really useful to keep that in mind. And what we're going to do is think about, well, how can I manage this? How can I make sure that I have a much broader perspective when I think about my performance on what I'm doing? So I want to share with you something that we call ants. And ants are automatic negative thoughts. So these are quick thoughts. Generally, they happen without us even realizing. And the psychologist who coined them, Dr. Daniel Amen, said it's almost like there's an infestation of ants in your brain, which is stealing joy and fueling anxiety. And so these automatic negative thoughts are just there. We can never really eliminate them entirely, but actually we are able to notice them. And if we're able to notice them, then we are able to challenge their accuracy. Now, generally, there are two things that trigger ants in our brain. One is internal triggers. So these are things that are like maybe beliefs or thoughts or patterns of thinking. So if, for example, we have a fear of failure and we are doing something that's new, it might really trigger imposterism. Or else it could be external triggers. So maybe we've just been promoted, we're in a new role, or maybe when we are in the presence of people more senior than us, it might trigger us. I know, for example, anytime I'm running a new workshop, I have both internal and external triggers of imposter syndrome. So my internal triggers are because of my perfectionism. I start worrying I won't remember all the things I want to say, or I'm not going to get it right, or I need to do more research on this. So those are the ants that start crawling in my brain. And the external trigger is the novelty. It's the new thing. If I haven't done it before and I don't know what to expect, it kind of heightens my perfectionism, if you like. But I know this, and knowing this then allows me to catch it and manage some of those ants. So, what the first thing that we need to do is to be aware or to become aware of the ants that we experience most often. So, for example, you might notice that there's a recurring thought that happens very often for you. In this case, the example is maybe we might be thinking, my seniors don't think I'm performing to the level expected. And we've got this inner kind of ant that's doing the rounds in our brain. And secondly, is knowing what is it that triggers this ant. So is it, for example, the fact that I'm not getting any feedback? Is it the fact that I'm working on something new, right? Whatever it is, knowing the trigger can then help us catch it. Because the reality is that in the heat of the moment when we are experiencing imposterism, we don't even realize, right? We are just hearing these thoughts and assuming they are true at a subconscious level. We don't even realize that we're doing it. So being able to pause and notice them is the first step. Over time, I've realized that whenever I've got these ants running in my brain, I get a sinking feeling in my gut. And so nowadays, whenever I've got that sinking feeling in my gut, I tell myself, ooh, what did I just think? So I'm able to pause and literally reflect on what is it that I've just said. And that helps me then unearth the thought. Because the third part of this is actually to reframe the thought. So, for example, in this case, the person is saying, well, they recognize me as reliable and are simply giving me more autonomy. That is so much better than my seniors don't think I'm performing. Right? So it can give us a sense of reassurance when we're able to catch the thought and reframe it. So, for example, for me, with a new workshop, I will remind myself, look, maybe, the workshop is new, but I have experience in the subject matter. So, yes, I can still bring in my knowledge, even though the way it's been structured is new. I'm just going to check if there are any questions. Okay, no, I'm just hearing 100%. Yeah. So actually, this is something that's really, really useful for us to keep in mind. And a really powerful question that we can ask ourselves is this: does this thought help me or make matters worse? And if it's worse, what would be a more helpful way to think about this? So we start to see how we are able to change the conversation in our mind through this question, if we are able to catch that ant in the first place. So over time, you might want to start paying attention to how your body might feel or any change in physical sensations whenever you are in the grip of imposterism. Because then over time, you might be able to actually pause and manage that thought as it happens. All right, I'm seeing a chat come up. I'm just going to check whether there is a question. So Mercy's saying, for me, it's reading facial expression and body language. It makes me feel like I'm letting the team down. How do I overcome that? Mercy, I love that you've asked this question because I think so many of us will look at a face and interpret it in 101 different ways. And I actually still remember I used to do a lot of train the trainer programs. So I'd teach other trainers how to deliver workshops. And one of the exercises I would do was this: I would get someone to sit on a chair, and I would tell them, I would give them a little note saying, "Do nothing." Except they had to look at this person, and the other person had to speak to them. And then I would ask the other person, okay, based on this person's facial expression, what do you think is going on for them? And without fail, the comments I used to get would be, oh, they're disagreeing with me, they're feeling really cynical, they're bored, they're disengaged. And it blew my mind how we can take a facial expression and always see the negative. And I think this is some of the power of imposterism, right? It puts this lens on our perspective where we interpret any behavior in a negative way. So when you're saying I'm looking at expressions and body language and say, I'm letting them down, I would maybe try and challenge that. Maybe they're just thinking, maybe they're reflecting, maybe they're disappointed with the message, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're disappointed with you. I will ask them out loud, Lucy, to help. I'm not sure that you are able to see unless people send it to everyone. That's the only way we can see them. All right. Okay, so that's one way, right? For us to really ask ourselves, does this thought make help me or make matters worse? Now, we've talked about how we might catch ourselves and reframe our thinking. Let's now look at another tool that we can use. And this is a quote by Ken Blanchard, who's a management expert and an author. And he said, feedback is the breakfast of champions. And I guess my question then to you is, when did you last eat? Feedback is so useful because it might help give us a different perspective to how we are viewing reality. And whether it's praise or improvement feedback, it doesn't matter. So when we receive praise, it might help remind us of the things that we bring to the table, which is why it's so important that we don't dismiss it. We'll talk a little bit about this in a little while. But improvement feedback sometimes can also help us realize that it's not so terrible, right? That it's not such a big deal. So I remember when I myself went through some facilitator training. So it's a week-long training course, and part of the training course was for me to deliver training with the specific purpose of getting feedback. So you can imagine how my imposter and my ants were having a party in my brain, right? I was bracing myself to be told that I was terrible at this, and oh my goodness, leave the room now. But the reality was that the improvement feedback I got, that actually still, of course, I still remember it. Thank you, negativity bias. But the piece of feedback I got was, you need to slow down a little bit more. I know I'm so passionate about the work that I do, and my excitement and passion sometimes means I speak fast. But actually, telling someone to slow down is pretty useful. It's pretty useful for me to know that rather than, it's not that I'm terrible, right? Slowing down is something that I can use and implement straight away. So it's really useful for us to actually use feedback to help us manage imposterism. Now, there's two types of feedback. There's feedback we get from others, but also there's feedback that we give ourselves, internal feedback. And in fact, we're going to start from there. And I want to share this quote. thinking about ourselves isn't the same as knowing ourselves. And what we're saying here is that actually obsessing about an event and maybe ruminating and looking at all the things we've done wrong is not the same as effective reflection or self feedback. In fact, Tasha Eurich, who's done a lot of research on self awareness, has discovered that the rumination and the negative feedback is actually worse than not reflecting at all. So, poor self reflection is more harmful than not reflecting. And one of the things she suggests is that we move away from the why questions and instead think about what on or where questions. So why questions might be things like, well, why didn't they accept my idea, or why didn't I get that promotion? And those kind of questions aren't very helpful. But instead, asking ourselves questions like, what are three things I did well? What did I learn from this experience? Where can I apply my learning? Where could I focus my effort going forward? These types of questions are really powerful in helping us grow and actually benefit from thinking about our own performance. And as you can see, they are not harsh, right? They are not critical. They're focusing on our growth. I came across a metaphor some years ago around approaching an event either with a hammer or with a flashlight, with a torch. And the idea is when we look at something we've done with a hammer, it's almost like, if you've got a hammer, you want to fix things. You want to either hang things, change. It's all about fixing, right? And it feels quite strong. Whereas when you were shining a light with a torch, it's a softer approach. And for me, it symbolizes curiosity rather than wanting to fix, it's just noticing. And I always try to remember the torchlight whenever I am reflecting on an event. Something else that has really helped me is instead of having a to-do list, I have a ta-da list. And a ta-da list is something I do at the end of the day where I actually capture one thing I'm really happy about having done or I feel good about. And I do that because it helps me start to rewire that negativity bias. So instead of ending the day thinking about all the things I haven't done or all the things that went wrong, I end the day looking at all the things that I've done right. Someone, yeah, I love it. Yes, stealing is absolutely allowed in this. And again, for me, it's about a different pattern, teaching our brain a different way of thinking. Now, of course, there's internal feedback, and research shows that doing this well combined with external feedback is so useful and powerful for our growth. And there's this quote by Stephen Covey that says, "It takes humility to seek feedback. It takes wisdom to understand it, analyze it, and appropriately act on it." And I would actually add that besides humility, we need courage to ask for feedback. And so, because I know that the absence of feedback sometimes makes us assume that we're doing a terrible job. So, for many of us, feedback might be missing. We might not be getting enough feedback. So, it's easy to assume the negative reasons because of this. So I remember I was coaching someone from an IHR actually, and she had just been promoted to a senior role. And her first job was to set out a strategy for her team. And she had conversations with her team and then put her own thinking and set out this strategy. And she put it in a document, emailed it to her manager. And after 24 hours, no response. After 48 hours, no response. And by this point, her mind, her ants are crawling all over the place. Oh my goodness, her key thought was, oh my goodness, it is so bad that my manager can't even bring herself to talk to me about it. That was the assumption. And luckily, she had a coaching session and she brought it up and she brought up her anxiety around this. And she left with the action of actually reaching out to her manager to ask for feedback. And she was scared to do this because in her mind, she's going to hear how bad of a job she had done. It turns out, and I don't necessarily condone the style of leadership, but it turns out that her manager said, hey, I thought it was excellent. I didn't need to build on it. My style is if there's no news, it's good news. And whilst I don't think that's particularly helpful, to be honest, it was really interesting to notice the story and how different the story was in my client's mind versus in the reality. So I think this is what wisdom is that actually we are able to filter feedback in an accurate way rather than through the lens of self-doubt. So how do we make sure that when we are getting feedback, asking for feedback, that it is effective? So I'll share with you a few tips here. So first of all, especially if there is an absence of feedback, asking someone to give you feedback is not enough. So when we ask someone for feedback, as we know, most of us don't feel so comfortable in being honest, especially when it's improvement feedback. And so it's easy for someone to say, oh, you're doing fine. And then we might sense that there's something there. And again, we create a story in our minds, right? So instead, let's make sure that we ask for feedback in a way that gives people permission to be honest with us. So something like, what's one piece of advice that would help me improve? And I would be even more specific about this. Think of something that you would like to improve. Let's say you would like to get better at managing team meetings, for example. So I might say, I'd love to improve the way I lead meetings. What's one piece of advice you could give me that would help me improve? Or who else could I be working with or learning from? Or it could be, what's one thing I could do differently to improve in X? So those specific questions invite honesty, and you will get much more accurate, honest answers when you ask them in that way. The second thing that we need to do is to stop, pause, and separate. So sometimes, first of all, when we receive improvement feedback, and especially if it's a surprise or it's not something that we might agree with, we might immediately feel a little defensive. And pausing before responding, really taking the time to process it, can help us still get value out of it. And I love this question that we can ask ourselves: what are they trying to help me see? Or else, what can I learn from this, even if it clashes with how I see myself? So, for example, I remember coaching someone and I was going through their 360, and in their report, it said a number of people had said, please stop expecting me to work on a Sunday. And the person got a little bit defensive. He was like, well, that's really untrue. I don't expect my team to work on a Sunday. And I remember asking him, okay, so what is it that you are doing that could be creating that perception? And it turns out, he said, well, I really like to send emails on a Sunday. I don't expect an answer, but that's when I send them. And I had to smile to myself because actually, if you've never communicated that you don't expect an answer back, people will feel pressure to respond. And so it's the perception that was really important rather than his original intention, which was just to clear his email when he was quiet. And so really thinking about what is it that I'm doing that's creating that perception can be really useful. But I think also with this, it's important that we think about praise. and we pause and we really reflect on the praise that we get, especially if it's more than you did a good job. I still remember when I co-facilitated my first workshop with my new manager, and I was so nervous and I had lots of ants going on in my head. And when we finished the day, he said, "Well, how did you think that went?" And I'm like, "Oh my God, it was terrible. I forgot to say this and all of that." And he said, "Wow," he's like, "if this is how you truly feel, we need to have a conversation, because this is a very negative perception of a day that went brilliantly." And that immediately made me stop and think, oh, wow, okay, I need to have a more balanced view. And then I still remember he commented on the energy and the passion that I brought. And it was one of those things that when I paused and really held on to it, it gave me so much confidence in the next workshop that I was running. Because instead of just focusing on all the bad things and all the mistakes I did, I also reminded myself that, hey, I bring energy, I bring passion to this, and that is contagious and useful. And that was such a nice moment to show up in a much more confident state. The third one is to weigh all feedback equally. So same thing here. Often, I love that whenever I go through 360 feedback, the bits that people always remember is the improvement feedback. And they kind of seem impatient to get to that place because, the praise is, yeah, whatever. And I think some of it is British culture as well, the humility. But, the praise is the thing that's helping you succeed. So if you understand what is it that people are seeing in you that is really, really useful and helping you succeed, you'll know what to do more of. So it's important that we take the time to pay attention to it. All right, I'm just going to check a few questions because I've noticed like there's many coming in. So let's see, is the research outcome percentage gendered? I think this was at the beginning. No, it's not. It was just in general. What tends to happen is that women are much more likely to speak about feeling like imposters and to seek support. So this is why sometimes we think this is more of a female issue. It's not. There's men feel imposter syndrome as well. Yeah, and again, kind of, I think that's what creates the gender bias, Nicola, because if it's women who talk about it, then it's almost like it creates this bias of, oh, this is clearly an issue that women experience, but it's not. Is imposterism merely feeling like an imposter? Because some real imposters would feel this way. How would I know if I'm an actual imposter or just suffering from the phenomenon? For example, my educational background is different from most of my colleagues, which makes me feel unqualified. Am I really unqualified? I love this question. And to me, this is literally a great example of imposter phenomenon, right? Just because it's different doesn't mean that it's less valuable. And so it seems like the assumption I'm seeing here is that just because my education is different, then it's lesser than. And that's the kind of thought that would be useful to challenge, to ask, is this thought helpful or not? So for me, I would stay away from, but is this real? And if I'm saying it's imposter syndrome, then it means I don't really have it, and all of that. It can really tie us up in knots. Instead, leave that to one side and just ask yourself, is this thought helping me? And if it's not, what would be a more useful thought to have? If imposter thoughts can sometimes motivate us to perform better, should we really be trying to get rid of them? Yeah, the reality is the imposter thoughts are automatic. It's unlikely that they're all going to go away. And actually, that's not the expectation to have. For me, it's not that we have the thoughts that matters, it's what we do with them. So we, rather than getting rid of them, it's about managing them. So for example, first time I ran a workshop, I felt like a total fraud. I was inexperienced, right? But I could take two routes. I could either stop and never run a workshop again, because I feel that way. And that's when imposterism becomes maladaptive, right? It's stopping us, it's getting in the way. Or I could work hard, read more, seek advice, learn, and continue getting better. If ants are automatic and are often subconscious, how can we realistically catch them in the moment, especially during a busy workday? So this, I think, is the biggest challenge of all. Personally, what's really helped me is meditation. So I started meditating during COVID. So I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, and I have to say, the first time I tried to meditate, it was painful. My brain is just goes into overdrive. I really didn't know how to just focus on the breath. Over the years, what I've realized is that I've become much more mindful. So I'm really able to notice a shift in my body sensations, and that's where I can catch the shift of that sinking feeling, and I can pause and say, what did I think there? And the other thing that's really helped me is to develop self-compassion. So I journal quite a lot. And when I'm journaling, I try to keep in my mind to talk to myself like I'm talking to a friend, that I am, I'm supportive. So when I've got that supportive hat on, I speak in a way that is not critical, but it's actually encouraging. And that helps me a lot. So those are a couple of things that I hope can help. Yeah. And look, yeah, sometimes we will make mistakes and we are human, right? It's what we do with that mistake. So, sorry, I'll just read the question out loud. What if my negative thoughts feel realistic, like I actually made a mistake? A couple of people have voted here. And so, yeah, we will make mistakes. And again, there's two trains of thought that we can take. Oh my goodness, I made a mistake. I can't believe it. Shame on me. Clearly, I'm a fraud. Or, okay, I made a mistake. What can I learn from this? What will I do differently next time? And it's that conversation that can help us grow instead of paralyzing us. Ashraf is saying, I understand imposter syndrome can be okay to experience, but what can services do to identify and support staff to preventing the impact of imposter syndrome to become crippling? I do like the internal feedback idea. Okay, so first of all, you will notice through conversation, right? So if you are having conversations with someone and maybe a person is reluctant to do something, or they kind of can't think of anything that they've done well, those are maybe some of the signals, right? And actually, for you to really make sure that you're providing positive feedback, specific positive feedback, can be really useful. In terms of internal feedback, sharing the questions, right? Or working through them together. What are three things you think you've done well? What is one thing that you've learned from doing this? Can help the person start to change the way they assess past projects. Oh, I'll move on because there's quite a few questions and I want to make sure that I go through the highly voted ones. So I'm worried that asking for feedback will make me look insecure or unsure of myself, especially if I am senior. I love this question. And I think it's a really valid one because often when we are in senior positions, we put this pressure on ourselves that because we're in a leadership position, we need to have it all figured out. We need to be fully confident. We need to know all the answers. And those thoughts in themselves are the unhelpful thoughts, right? So, first of all, those are the thoughts I would start by challenging. And actually, I would invite you to think about leaders who are genuinely curious about getting feedback and your reaction to them. So, I was recently working with someone, a very, very senior person in a global organization. And she was talking about how she got her team to do a 360 feedback report and then actually shared her improvement suggestions with them so that they could hold her accountable. And every other leader looked at her in awe and admiration. So rather than thinking she was weak or vulnerable, actually they thought the opposite. Because I truly believe it takes courage to show that, hey, I'm not perfect, because it makes us feel vulnerable. But when we give ourselves permission to be human, to be vulnerable, guess what? We're giving other people the permission to be the same. And that is what then creates connection, which is actually the next thing that we want to talk about. But let's have a look at a couple more. So just Shandeep, so the question is imposter phenomenon more common in high achieving individuals? And if so, why? I don't have any research on this, but here's what I notice is that I want, it's like a chicken and egg situation. I wonder whether it's the imposter phenomenon that pushes people to work harder, to try more. And as long as it doesn't lead to us burning out or us not taking risks, I actually think it drives us to succeed. So that's the connection I can see through my own experience in coaching hundreds and hundreds of people. So what if you think you're doing an okay job, you're doing your best, your colleagues think you're doing great, but you have a manager who constantly criticizes you and picks faults with you? How do you manage that without allowing it to destroy your confidence? My goodness, thanks for asking this. Because again, this is on the other side, right? That actually sometimes we are in environments that can really trigger our imposterism. So, first of all, I want to remind you of the negativity bias. So, it's easier for people to spot what's wrong rather than what's right. And I remember having a manager exactly like this. And I still remember thinking, my goodness, I can't do anything right. And yet, within 6 months of me working there, despite feeling this frustration that, my goodness, I can't do anything right, she suggested that I get promoted. So it turns out that it was her style, right? And her manner and her way, rather than something's wrong with me. So I wonder if you feel courageous enough, whether you are able to let the manager know the impact that this is having on you. That actually it's making you question your abilities. It's making you question whether you are doing a good job or not. And I want, maybe by them seeing the impact that they're having, it might help them be a little bit more mindful. It might not. Sometimes we do end up in toxic environments, right? And if we feel like the environment that we are in is having a huge negative impact on our well-being or our confidence, maybe it's time to also think about changing the environment. Okay, I'm just going to move on to the final piece, and then I'll come back to the to more questions. So, the final thing is around how do we nurture connections that allow us to get open and honest feedback. And I love this quote by Maya Angelou, who says, I don't just study imposterism, I experienced it. It was my secret. It nearly always is. It's how imposterism gets such a good grip. It pays you hush money. And I think this is really important. This is something that Kristen Neff, who's done a lot of work on self-compassion, talks about. The idea that when we don't feel okay, it creates a sense of shame in us. It kind of makes us assume that we are the only ones experiencing this. And yet, when we are courageous enough to connect with others and share our experiences, first of all, it can give us a reality check. People might challenge how we're feeling. Secondly, we realize that this is a normal experience. So it normalizes the experience when other people will be like, oh, yeah, me too. This is something that I see a lot when we run a 2 or 3 day leadership program where people become more comfortable sharing the challenges that they're going through and how it makes them it challenges their confidence sometimes. And a very common comment I hear is, I didn't realize I wasn't the only one. But when we connect with others, it kind of can help us build confidence through validation. When people see or comment on the things we're doing well or agree with us, it can again boost our confidence. And actually, being able to talk about feeling imposterism reduces that shame that Kristen Neff talks about it and just makes it a normal human experience. And it can show you a different perspective, right? That actually how you're thinking is just one way. Um, there's a neuroscientist, Lisa Feldman, who talks about how there is no reality. There is just our reality. There isn't one truth. There are many truths based on how we view things, our perspective. And I think this is so important when we are thinking about how we think. So how do we create connection? So first of all, let's think about what support do we need? Do we need reassurance? Do we need advice? Do we need encouragement? Or do we need critique? When I came across this, I realized that I put pressure on myself to know it. So I've got this belief I must know the answer. And so I rarely asked for advice. And actually, what I've learned is when I ask for advice from my colleagues who are other facilitators, my goodness, I get to learn so much. And it's such a lovely conversation where we get to share ideas. So notice, which of these do you find it easier or more difficult to go for? Because all of them are important. And one of the things that can be really useful here is to think about your network and to map your network out. Who are the people in your network that can give you really good advice, or that who are your cheerleaders in the network? Who is someone who thinks very differently to you, so they can really critique your thinking or add to your thinking? Who is someone who is more experienced than you, who can actually share with you their experience and give you that advice? So taking the time to create your network and map it out can be really, really useful, so that in the moment when you are experiencing those feelings of imposterism, you can look at your map and think, right, who could I reach out to in this moment in time? And it's much easier than trying to think in the moment. And then secondly, thinking about how you can build or strengthen a supportive network. So in the moment, who is it that you can call in order to ask for support? I know my sister is always there. I can even just send her a message and she'll always be my cheerleader and remind me. Day to day, do you have partnerships? Maybe someone you can have meetings with or brainstorm with, or maybe just at a bigger picture, are there any affinity networks that you can join? I know I'm part of several networks, and getting together with other people who are working on similar projects, my goodness, is such a boost. So we've talked about three key things: outline your value, welcome feedback, and nurture connections. And so just to summarize, and I'll summarize and then I'll go back to the questions. Remember, make strength reflection a habit, so that tada list, thinking about the strengths that you brought to a project, can really help you start to internalize that success. Another tip here is to build a value vault. So the way I've done this is that whenever I receive a lovely piece of feedback, I've got a little folder in my email and it's just there. And every time I need a bit of a boost, I just open it up and I get some lovely reassurance from past feedback. When it comes to feedback, couple of things. Remember, feedback can really help replace distorted thinking. You might be assuming that just because you're thinking it, it's true. And the reality is that our brain feeds us all sorts of things. And sometimes those things are definitely not true. Actively seek external feedback with practical self-reflection. Remember to use what questions rather than why, and actually ask specific questions of others so you give them permission to be honest. Finally, connection is the antidote. Hearing me too normalizes your experience. Remember to build a support map. Identify people who uplift, challenge, or guide you, and reach out regularly for support. So I'm seeing a lot of chat coming in, and I'm seeing loads of links that are being sent, which is great. In the meantime, we've got about 5 minutes left. So I'm going to go through some more of the questions. I'm just going to quickly see how many there are. Oh, not loads. I might be able to get through them all. Okay, so how can I stop feeling of not deserving praise? Yeah, and it's that, right? That's imposter phenomenon showing up. It makes it really difficult to internalize praise. So I would actually take the time to write it down and to think about, and for me, praise isn't you did a good job, right? For me, praise is you asked some excellent questions that really helped our thinking move forward, or the way you shared your idea was really crisp and to the point, or I love how you diffused the tension by asking a question. So if you're not getting that, it might be worth asking for specific examples, because sometimes you did a great job is that's what's hard to internalize because it gives you nothing. So ask for examples and then maybe write them down, because the more you write them down, the more likely it is that you're going to internalize them. The emphasis on external praise and feedback feels false and insincere to me. Should we be placing more emphasis on self-reflection to give ourselves more agency and be less dependent on external factors? Debbie, I can see where you're coming from, right? It's almost like I'm reading between the lines. I'm almost hearing like we're asking for reassurance. The research shows that it's a combination of both that is the most powerful for our growth. And I wonder why it's feeling insincere, right? I wonder if it's because you're expecting reassurance versus real growth. So I'm not quite sure what's creating that perception of lack of sincerity. Because here's how I view feedback, right? And I think I believe that there's always potential for growth. I can always get better at what I do. Regardless of how many years I've been doing this, there's always something I can learn. So if I am asking for feedback from that perspective, and I'm asking, what's one thing that you see me doing well? That helps me know what it is that I'm doing well. And what's one thing that can help me improve can actually raise my awareness. And I don't detect a lack of sincerity there. So I wonder whether it's the intent behind our feedback or the questions behind that we're using to get feedback that might create that feeling. Can imposter syndrome be a warning, like anxiety, like if you're in a bad relationship? Totally, absolutely. So, if not feeling psychologically safe, surrounded by people who maybe are overly critical or harsh, is definitely a warning. And sometimes, as I said, we might not be able to change the environment. And if that's the case, and if it's affecting our mental health, then let's focus on what is within our control, whether it's giving feedback, whether it's changing environment, but it's always focusing on what is within my agency. What is it that I can do? And yes, I've definitely worked and coached people who have been in terrible environments that has had a huge impact on their mental health. Yeah, someone is saying mindfulness and self-compassion. There's a fantastic book by Kristen Neff, Self-Compassion for Burnout. It's one of her latest ones. She co-wrote it with another author, so I would definitely recommend that. So for me, Jashandeep, the tada list, one thing I've done well, really helps me train my brain to think about the positive stuff, not just the negative stuff. So that's one. And the journaling habit, reflecting on the week. What did I learn? What went really well? What's my focus for next week? Those kind of journal questions can be really useful. What if I don't feel like, that's a really good question. What if I feel like I don't have anyone in my network that I can go to for support? Where do I start? Yes, sometimes my relationships are transactional. For me, my recommendation is to really think about how do you build personal relationships. So if we only rely on our relationships based on, formal meetings, they're not going to develop into human connections. Grabbing someone for a coffee can really help. Showing vulnerability first, and it doesn't have to be, sharing our deepest darkest secrets. It could be something like, I found that project really challenging. That can be useful. So things like that can be really, really helpful. There's a couple more questions, so I'm going to go through them as well. I deeply struggle to receive positive feedback, even when people assure me or encourage me that I did well. I don't trust them and always feel like they are just being nice, especially people I admire. How do I've kind of answered a little bit of this earlier, which is ask for specific examples, write them down. Over time, if you see the same piece of feedback repeated time and time and time again, your mind will start to accept that it might just be the truth. All right. I think that's all we've got time for today. I know there's a feedback link there. I really hope that this has given you some ideas, but I've also got a list of things that you will be sent in the handout of either things you can listen to or read or watch. So I really hope that this has given you some food for thought and helps you manage those ants and that imposterism going forward. You are so welcome. Thank you for the lovely feedback. It's always nice to see, and it helps my ants as well.
Thank you, Karen.
You're so welcome.
Hopefully everybody has found this webinar beneficial and is able to implement some of the behaviours we've explored today. So thank you for your time. And if you've got any questions, please contact the development and support team. Thank you.